Well, hello again, and welcome back to Our Way to Intro. Did you come here for an exciting and enjoyable, entertaining intro? Well, you found the place. Here at Intros Are Us, we are selling intros for just 60 cents per second per minute. Yeah, you do the math. Yeah, here at Our Way to Intro, we always think that you should start an episode, like episode 4, for example, with a good intro. Now, I've already kind of done all these gimmicks, so it's going to start getting redundant. Well, honestly, I use all the good ones, but these ones they're there. They're ideas. But we will sell you our extra redundant ones that we're not going to use. So if anybody wants to buy these rejects from me, I got a whole book of rejected intros. I mean, I could probably give this up for 4 million pesos. You're going to have to fight over it. It's back there. And that's how we do things here at Our Way to Intro, and this is episode 4.
Right across this country into the starlight, 12,000 miles, turn back, do it again. No destination, it's just a journey. You were my lover and friend.
Good morning. We are headed back to Home Depot today. Last night we went to Home Depot to get all of the plywood and insulation that we need, hopefully for the rest of the build. I hope we got it all in one shot. But we went right at closing time. We were super tired. They charged us double price for the 1/2 inch. We got 4, they charged us for 8, and we didn't even notice until we got back home.
Yeah.
So we are headed back there this morning to get half of our money back for that. Also pick up the 2x3s that we forgot.
Yeah. Don't go there when you're sleepy.
But thankfully we're able to borrow a truck so we can go pick those things up. But first, I think that we're gonna go get a coffee. What do you think?
Huh?
Yeah, definitely.
Shocker, we found some more stuff in there that we had to get. Also, I'm sure we forgot a bunch of stuff we need to get.
Always.
So, we did get more than just the return out of it, though. And the return money was almost the same as what I spent on the wood we needed.
Hey, that's pretty good.
Planks.
Okay,
So.
we ended up at Home Depot before coffees.
Oh,
so
yeah.
now we definitely have to go get that and hopefully not come back to Home Depot one more time this week.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Hopefully.
We bring soy milk with us in the car because we're so used to traveling with our whole house with us. We don't know what it's like to not have all our different plant milks.
Some of these places don't have anything.
This is episode 4. We are insulating the walls and ceiling. We are putting up our furring strips, and we're also adding the studs for our bathroom walls.
Before we really even get into this video, I wanted to just say that if you're not doing a complete composite box, you're sort of kidding yourself about how perfect it can be, and people can argue over like, you should do this or you should do that. I think that you're just doing your best effort to mitigate moisture and insulate as well as you can, unless you are building a complete, like, perfect composite box that has no thermal bridging, that has no way moisture can get in. If you're not doing that, then it's just do the best with what's available, and you're gonna have to make choices along the way that are gonna suit what you're doing. And I don't really think there's a perfect way to do it. It's really about just doing the best with the vehicle platform you have to work with and the resources available. Insulation is just like much of the build. It's a personal choice, and it depends on what you're trying to do with your build. If you're someone who's gonna be in the snow and you need a 4-season camper because you're gonna be skiing and snowboarding, that sort of stuff, insulation should be very high on your priority. If you're somebody who follows the seasons as we do, it's not as crazy, and you start splitting hairs about the little bit that you're gaining when you just dive into every nuance of it. Just do a decent job, and if you're following the seasons, you'll be fine. You're trying to avoid the extremes, so if that's your goal, I wouldn't go too crazy on it.
This is a very hotly debated topic, and I've really dove into some of the research lately, and I am so tired of reading about conduction and convection and radiation, and it gets really scientific and really complicated, and you could argue so many different ways, this is the best or that's the best. Really, you are just doing the best with what you have to work with. It is a completely imperfect platform. You're insulating a vehicle that was not made to be a house, whether it's a bus or a van or a box truck. So in the end, just do your best and it's gonna be a great home in the end. Last week, we insulated the floor using XPS foam board. We also framed it out, did the subfloor. So the floor is completely done, but now it's time to insulate the walls and the ceiling. So for this, we chose 1-inch polyiso insulation board. This has an R value of about 6. There are so many types of insulation that you can use in these vehicles. You have to kind of weigh the R value versus the cost versus the toxicity versus the moisture resistance, the ease of installation. And so for us, polyiso board kind of checked all of these boxes. It is really easy to install, it's non-toxic, it has a pretty good R value for its cost, and it's also completely water resistant. The first thing that we had to do for the installation was go into the vehicle and again make a little chart. I took the measurements of each little square in the framing, wrote it down, labeled it so that when I make the cuts, I know where each piece goes. Huge time saver. We've talked about it a million times before. This is a really easy thing to do that will save you a lot of headache when you go to put all the squares in. After I made the chart, it was time to actually get out each piece of polyiso board and make all of those cuts. Polyiso board is so easy to cut. This is one of the things about it, that its installation is just really simple. I cut it with a razor blade, a straight edge, a square helps as well. And I just went through and made all of those cuts until I had each piece from my chart.
I cannot escape. I'm here till it breaks. Oh, how my heart aches. You keep blowing me out, I keep holding you in. I keep asking myself, oh, why do you still hurt? Why do you still hurt?
Coming at you with another really satisfying time lapse, all of those pieces of insulation just popping right into place. Now our framing was 1x2 metal tubing, so that means that our walls are just over an inch thick with the fiberglass, but the space for this insulation is exactly 1 inch, which is so simple to just pop 1-inch insulation board in there. It doesn't get easier than that.
Yeah.
So now at this point, all of the insulation board was in, but then I looked at it and realized that we put it in backwards. We usually face the reflective foil side of the polyiso board out. Now, the brand that we bought this year was a different brand that we've never used, and it's the opposite of the type that we usually use. The writing faces inward on our buses, which means the reflective side is out. And the reflective side of this polyiso board had writing on it. So my brain got all confused and I installed it backwards. So we did decide to flip it around. Most polyiso board is foil backed on both sides, but one side is reflective and one side is white or blue or some sort of color. And in our builds, we've just decided to put the foil side out. So we did flip it around to keep it consistent with that. And so we had to go in and flip each board and press it back in place.
Now, when we said people argue about this stuff, you can go into whole forums about which way to face just the reflective side of this. We like to put it out, but you can do your own deep dive on that and decide what's best for your build.
This is just based on what I read in the spec sheets from the company that makes this polyiso board. It did say to face foil side out, but it's so contingent on what type of weather you expect to be in the most, and it's different because your house moves around on wheels. I don't know, you could argue forever about it. We put foil side out. That was our choice.
Sure, and I could be wrong, but I really think you're starting to just split hairs with what you're really gaining on this. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's just how I feel about it. I think it's not going to be like so drastically different one way or the other.
With the polyiso board, we just made sure that it really popped into place as snug as possible against the wall, because you don't want any air gaps behind the board where moisture could get trapped. We then went around the whole vehicle and filled any kind of gap that we saw with gaps and cracks. This is the expandable foam. And we had some little grooves in between the framing that we installed and the pre-existing hat channel. So it was really good to just go around and fill all of that with the foam. It expands, and then we just trimmed it flush with the wall.
These are the fun jobs I try to have Savannah do, because somehow I always get it all over me. Any sort of like spray foam or doing caulk, it's like just all over my clothes. You're like, what are you doing?
Historically, you have been covered in spray foam.
Oh, it's so bad. That stuff, dude, don't get that on your skin either. It takes forever to get off. It's horrible.
But we're together, that's our game. Round and round and round we go. The dance ain't over, I'm sure we're still the same. Love the ways you make us home. Would you say if things ain't right? Look away, look away. What's really going on? What's really going on? Would you tell me? Can't you say what's really going on? What's really going on? Down the bottom in the home, there's no sane ways there.
In this build, we're trying something that we haven't tried before in our other buses, and that is adding foil tape on all the seams of the polyiso board and also over all of the metal ribbing of the inside of the vehicle. It is our hope that this can act as maybe a vapor barrier, or at the very least just kind of reduce condensation on those metal bars that are in direct contact with the furring strips or any of the wall panels.
If you have metal framing, like most of these vehicles do, thermal bridging is a fact, and all you can do is try to mitigate that moisture to the best of your ability with materials available.
I see it argued a lot that a vapor barrier can never be perfect in one of these vehicles, and that is probably true. So I guess with this foil tape, we're just trying to fight some of that direct condensation off of the metal bars. But it is an attempt at a vapor barrier. I think a little bit will help more than doing absolutely nothing. So we're giving it a shot in this build. I'm just interested to see how this vehicle is going to perform as far as insulation and moisture control with that foil tape versus our bus that we didn't do any kind of taping even between the polyiso board or on the metal bars. I'm kind of just interested to see the differences between the two. Once the foil tape was finished, the polyiso board was all in place. We looked like a spaceship.
All right, deep space exploration, here we come.
not a submarine, a spaceship.
That'd be fun. Following that, it was time to install the furring strips. So we just followed the framing of the bus as well. We added a few spots like around the windows, around the door, and the vent fans.
Really anywhere we knew we were going to mount something like a wall panel or a cabinet, the ceiling boards. We put a furring strip right there so we would have something to mount into.
This is a point where it's good to have your full sort of plan ready, because you might encounter something like in the bathroom where there isn't naturally a lot of spots to screw that wall into. I know in the shuttle buses it happens because you're often covering a window. So make sure you do put in some crossbars so you have more points of contact to screw that wall into. Otherwise, it's going to be flimsy probably. So you got to kind of think about that stuff ahead of time.
For the furring strips, we use 1x2s and we screw them directly into the metal ribbing. We really tried to screw into the metal that we added, the 1x2s that we welded into place, and not the hat channel, because the hat channel is a lot thinner than the 1x2s that we added. So just to get a little bit more thread on that screw, we tried to go into the 1x2s.
Guys, when you get to this process, have a cold drink ready, a lot of deep breaths, because it sounds easy, but in our experience, it's usually pretty frustrating. Drill bits break, screws like to break a lot. Anytime you're like securing into metal, it's tough. Screws, it's hard to get good screws. You think you bought a good pack and just like the heads are breaking off. So just take a lot of deep breaths.
If you remember the bus that we did last summer, we talked about the furring strips in that build series, and it was a brutal process. It was super, super hot. We could not get drill bits that wouldn't break. I don't know if it was the thickness of the metal or what was going on. All our screws were breaking. It was a terrible time. It took us a few days. Also, the shuttle buses have a lot more metal on the internal cage than this box truck does. But this process with the Unicell, I thought it was much easier. I don't know if it was because we added our own framing or what it was, but it just took us a few hours. It really wasn't that difficult. It was a pretty easy process compared to the bus. And I was very thankful for that, because honestly, I was prepared for a bad time from our experience with the buses, but it really wasn't too bad.
In my experience, the best way to do it, first of all, make sure the screws aren't too long. Second, get your drill bit and then get self-tapping screws still. Make that hole and then use a self-tapping screw. It usually will clean it out to the perfect amount for that screw. When you just use the self-tapping screws, if the metal's thick, it's pretty tough to do. So if you drill it with a drill bit and then use a self-tapping screw, it usually works probably the best of anything else, because the straight metal screws into the drilled hole, they break a lot too, or they get pinched.
All of this is to say we got the 1x2s up on the wall and our furring strips were finished.
No, Savannah, I have 45 more minutes I want to talk about putting on these furring strips, okay?
At this point, we were on a roll with adding wood to the walls of the vehicle, so we thought it was a good time to frame out our bathroom walls. We put up 2x3 studs, and this is a pretty typical process, just as you would do in a house, honestly. But we made this a lot easier on ourselves when we were doing the metal framing of the vehicle, because we welded tabs right above where the bathroom wall was going to be. There was holes in these tabs for the screws ready to go. We had already lined them up so that the 2x3 would be completely straight up and down, square to the floor. We'd already marked it all out. So that made our life so much easier, and all we had to do was actually do the install. The very first 2 pocket holes of the whole build, right there. Season opener.
This process has been different on each vehicle, and you're gonna encounter that. So some platforms are gonna be easier than others. But the main point, you're trying to make sure you have solid contact points, as many as you can really, but you definitely need the floor. You definitely need to get something up top. So whether you can weld in a piece of metal to screw into, or if you have to add a piece of wood up there that you can screw into, and if you can catch the sidewall, it's great. Just try to make it as rigid as it can be. You're gonna basically be building a strong rectangle anyways, then you're just mounting it to the floor, ceiling, and side wall, and it'll be pretty strong.
This is where building in a vehicle can be a little bit difficult. If you're building in a house, you just get your level out and you make sure that everything's plumb and that it's level. But when you're building in a vehicle, you might not be parked on the most even surface, or maybe because of the suspension, it's a little bit tilted. It can be very difficult to make sure that things are square and straight and that everything that you're building is as structurally sound as it can be. But for us, the best way that we've found to try to make completely straight walls and cabinets is to just make sure that the 2x3 is square to the ground. So we will literally get out a square and make sure that it's as straight as it can be. Look at it visually. You'll be able to see if it's a little bit to the right or left. The hardest part of these walls was making sure that each wall was plumb to the other wall. And so we had to do some kind of fancy rigging for that. We did kind of get out a straight edge, secure it to both walls, and then kind of measure from the wall to the straight edge. It had to get a little bit complicated because there just wasn't anything good to measure to.
This is kind of how it goes. You do the best you can. Make sure those 2x3s are straight as they can be. Those things are twisted a lot. When you're at the store, lumberyard, wherever, really take it out, look at it down both ways, and try to get the straightest one you can, because some of them are bad.
Yeah, they are. You just want to make sure that everything involved with the wall is as square as it can be, as level, as plumb, in line. Everything should just match up, and it's a lot of checking and rechecking, but it's worth it to save yourself some headache down the line.
For us, this is the only full floor-to-ceiling wall in our build. Keep in mind, if you are putting walls in that are going to be supporting anything heavy, you want to use those studs that go across as points to mount. For us, we put in our Dickinson marine heater, which is pretty heavy, so we make sure to line that up first. So when we go to screw that in, it's not just being supported by that 1/2 inch plywood. It's going to go right into the stud and have a really sturdy point to lock into.
On both of our walls, the horizontal beam in between the 2 studs is at the level that the top of the bracket for the heater will be, and also on the other wall, that horizontal beam is supporting the shower mixer valve. So you kind of have to think about what is going to be attached to the wall, and especially in the bathroom, your plumbing, and just make sure that nothing is in the way and that everything that needs that extra support has it.
That wraps up episode 4. We got the insulation, the furring strips, and the bathroom wall up. And with many of these things, guys, just remember, you're doing the best with what you have available and within the space you're working. So don't get too crazy about it, or maybe get really crazy about it. It's up to you.
Don't get too overwhelmed, don't get too stressed. Remember, builds are supposed to be fun. We're having fun. We're moving on to episode 5. That is crazy. We are so ready, and we will see you guys next time.
Later.